Business owners in San Francisco's Chinatown are struggling with a slump in business due to fear surrounding the coronavirus. KPIX5's Ann Makovic is live as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi addresses the issue there. Ann?
Yeah, come with me as we stalk House Speaker Pelosi right now. She's been taking a tour down Chinatown, and we have stopped already at a temple. We've stopped at a fortune cookie factory, the Walk Shop, which sells cookware, and now she is stopping at one of the little gift shops in Chinatown. If you can see her live now, she has been talking to people along the way, a lot of business owners, a lot of community leaders here in Chinatown who have been concerned about the optics of the coronavirus and the fear that some people might have coming to a place like Chinatown that might have a lot of Chinese nationals. So she has been going around to show that it is perfectly safe to be here. She says that this is a very special place to her heart because she started a lot of her early campaigning when she started her political career, some of it right here in Chinatown. And we got some word from her earlier on sort of the message that she's trying to purvey here.
It's exciting to be here, especially at this time, to be able to be unified with our community. We want to be vigilant about what that might be on what is out there in other places. We want to be careful about how we deal with it, but we do want to say to people, come to Chinatown. Here we are. We're, again, careful, safe, and come join us.
Again, I want to point out that no cases of the coronavirus have been found here in Chinatown or San Francisco at all. So she's really just trying to point that out because they have seen a drop in business here. Again, back at the Chinese Bazaar gift shop here on Grant Street. She's a real tourist attraction in and of herself, as you can imagine. People are so excited to see her, people from all over the world. And again, of course, right here in Chinatown, who are really happy for the speaker's support today. Live in San Francisco, Ann Makovic, KPIX5.
These people are sick.
Well, the New York Times, in case you don't read it, still being published, still out of New York, ran a piece the other day with this headline: Alarm, Denial, Blame, the pro-Trump media's coronavirus distortion. They hit the same themes. In the telling of the New York Times, coronavirus coverage on this show and elsewhere followed a certain pattern. The pattern, they told us, went this way. Step one, blame China. According to the New York Times, quote, when the virus ravaged China, some pundits on the right warned that the country couldn't be trusted to contain the outbreak or share accurate information about where it originated. Can you believe they thought that? Where they got that idea? Because it's true, but the New York Times doesn't admit that. Then step two, playing down the risks, followed by step three, share survivor stories to show the virus wasn't so bad, and finally step four, blame the left. Now, as you're aware from watching this program and from living in this country, whatever these people accuse you of doing is 100% of the time exactly what they're doing themselves. And that, of course, was the case here. As you know, the establishment press has been screwing up coronavirus stories from day one. So there are 4 steps to understanding their coverage, and here's what they are. The first step, as usual, blame racism. Here are 2 New York Times headlines from the early days of the outbreak. Quote, an outbreak of racist sentiment as coronavirus reaches Australia. In other words, people's bad opinions are worse than a pandemic. Here's another. In Europe, fear spreads faster than the coronavirus itself. Okay. So then, as the virus kept spreading, there was step 2, play down the risks, which the New York Times assiduously did. On January 29th, the paper warned you to, quote, beware the pandemic panic. Calm down, ladies and gentlemen. A week later, they asked, who says it's not safe to travel to China? Book a ticket to Wuhan, racist! Somehow, telling the public that coronavirus was no big deal didn't in the end contain the virus, so the Times went to step 3, politicize the crisis. Calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus is bigotry, the paper will tell you, but they had no problem on February 26th publishing an op-ed saying, quote, let's call it Trump virus. And then last week, in a shameful moment that will live forever in infamy, the paper declared, and I'm quoting, "The road to coronavirus hell was paved by evangelicals." Yeah, that's right. A pandemic that emerged from an atheist country is really the fault of Christians, says the New York Times. That tells you a lot about where they are. And now this week, the paper has settled on its favorite step. Step 4, blame Fox News. Of course, because there's a political strategy here. Last week, they warned about, quote, Fox's fake news contagion. Then there was yesterday's article. Talk about a lie. The show was telling you about the dangers of this disease way back in January, when the Times was still wondering if it was racist to even know it existed, and encouraging you to travel to Wuhan on vacation.
How dare you?
Now, we're highlighting the continued dishonesty and malevolence of China. Meanwhile, the New York Times and the Star reporter Donald McNeil is going over to MSNBC to deliver unpaid infomercials for the Chinese Communist Party. Watch this.
In China, there are 40,000 doctors, nurses, and respiratory technicians who went from all over China to Wuhan and helped the Wuhan doctors fight the virus. There's no more virus in Wuhan. Those doctors have all gone home. There have been victory parades for them, gratitude, flowers, and everything. They're heroes. They not only have the skills, a lot of them caught the virus and are now immune, so they can do a lot of things that would be dangerous for somebody who hasn't got the virus to do. I don't see why we couldn't hire for our pandemic a lot of those doctors, nurses, respiratory technicians.
So, if you're Donald McNeil's editor, if you're watching this, aren't you calling his supervisor saying, bring McNeil in, he's giving away the truth? What a shill. Bring in Chinese doctors to run our hospital. That's his take. It's not surprising, though. Apparently Chinese doctors already run the New York Times. Unfortunately, there's a lot of jackasses in the media mob and the psychopaths in the Democratic Party, more concerned with bludgeoning President Trump than actually helping in this moment of crisis. In the middle of a national emergency, the media mob actively trying to suppress information that the President of the United States is giving to the American people. One far-left media group has actually petitioned the FCC to actually censor the President's daily coronavirus task force pressers. They don't want Americans to see the critical information that they are wanting and needing for their families. And they're not alone either. Take a look, some of the worst.
If it were up to me, and it's not, I would stop putting those briefings on live TV. But if he keeps lying like he has been every day on stuff this important, all of us should stop broadcasting it. Honestly, it's going to cost lives.
It's obviously above my pay grade. I don't make the call that we take them or not, but it seems crazy to me that everyone's still taking them when you got the MyPillow guy getting up there talking about reading the Bible.
I'm not actually sure, if you want to be honest, that we should carry that live. I think we should run snippets. I think we should do it afterwards and get the pertinent points to the American people, because he's never, ever going to tell you the truth.
We choose science over fiction. We choose truth over facts.
These people are sick.
This week, fake news CNN and Roswell Rachel Maddow. Thank God it's not up to her. And, of course, the state-run Democratic Social Party, MSDNC, bowing to pressure from their conspiracy theorist hosts. And frequently, they are cutting away from the President of the United States while he's given important information, giving that to the American people during a national emergency. Pathetic, despicable, but sadly predictable. New York Times encouraging people you should travel to China on February 5th. Oh, that's brilliant. February 1st, Mr. Pimple, you reading your own newspaper. They're telling their readers at the Washington Post, get a grip. The flu is, way worse than the coronavirus. According to the Boston Globe, the president has blood on his hands. Others bashing yours truly, claiming we have blood on our hands. Nothing but a lie. We have reported the facts without fear from day one. Our very first interview with Dr. Fauci was on January 27th. You can see it all on Hannity.com. But of course, we know the media mob is working in conjunction with the Democratic Party. They're one and the same. The same people that have lied for 3.5 straight years. Yep, they're still at it. And tonight, the actions from some top Democrats is beyond abhorrent. Here's an example. Remember this guy, the corrupt, congenital liar, compromised Adam Schiff?
Yeah, right now in the middle of a national emergency, we're still responding. He wants a 9/11 Commission-style report on how the president handled the coronavirus issue. Unlike the 9/11 Commission report, Schiff's political witch hunt would not investigate the actions of Congress, only Trump. Well, meanwhile, Pelosi has already set up a committee solely committed to oversee the president's response to coronavirus. While he was doing the travel ban, let's see, you guys were impeaching him. How many Democrats, I want every Democrat to answer this question, in retrospect, was the president's travel ban 10 days after the first known case in the U.S., was that the right call, in retrospect? She appointed Democratic Majority Whip James Clyburn to lead the committee. Remember, he's the guy who stated his intention to use the crisis for, quote, to restructure things to fit our vision. Moments ago, the president responded. Let's take a look.
This is not the time for politics, endless partisan investigations. Here we go again. I've already done extraordinary damage to our country in recent years. You see what happens. It's witch hunt after witch hunt after witch hunt. And in the end, the people doing the witch hunt have been losing, and they've been losing by a lot. Conducting these partisan investigations in the middle of a pandemic is a really big waste of vital resources, time, attention, and we want to fight for American lives, not waste time.
Even in the middle of a national emergency, a pandemic, Democrats, media mob, they can't stop their compulsion and hatred of Donald Trump beyond disgusting behavior. Remember I was saying all the time, if Donald Trump cured cancer, they'd want to impeach him. Would they have enacted the travel ban? Good question for anybody running for office this coming November in 215 days from today. Can they even admit that it saved countless of Americans from contracting the disease and exponentially, mathematically, from dying? Pelosi is not alone in this destructive behavior. New York Senator Chucky Schumer, he can't stop complaining despite the massive amount of federal assistance. There's never been an effort like this for any one state. The president now directing it all to New York, the epicenter, and it's just not good enough for Schumer. In fact, he sent the president a letter demanding that he appoint a senior military officer to lead the federal government's logistical response. Problem is, Chuck's not paying attention. The president did that a long time ago. Take a look.
Senator Schumer wrote a letter today, and he says, you should put a military man in charge. I said, well, Chuck, if you knew a little bit more, we have one of the most highly respected people in the military, the admiral. This is what he does, too, very professionally. And he's in charge, but Chuck didn't know that.
President doing a travel ban, quarantines, and Schumer leading the impeachment. Also sent a letter to Schumer, writing, quote, thank you for your Democratic public relations letter and incorrect sound bites, which are wrong in every way. And the president continued, if you spent less time on your ridiculous impeachment hoax and instead focused on helping the people in New York, then the state would not have been so completely unprepared for this invisible enemy. Speaking of which, today the president had some strong words for states like New York. This is an epic fail, completely unprepared for any kind of catastrophe. How could that be? Take a look.
The states should have been building their stockpile. We have almost 10,000 in our stockpile, and we've been building it, and we've been supplying it. But the states should be building. We're a backup. We're not an ordering clerk. We're a backup. And we've done an unbelievable job. Ideally, those states should have had all this equipment, and I think they will the next time. You know, you heard the case where thousands of ventilators could have been had at a very inexpensive price 3 years ago. And a certain state decided not to exercise that right because they wanted to build a road or they wanted to build something else because it's big money. You're talking about, I think it was $1 billion, but you're talking about a lot of money for something that may never happen.
Shame on you.
No, it was less than 600,000, but they were spending 750 on a solar project that went belly up, 90 million on a light bulb project belly up, another 600 million that went belly up. Now that brings us to New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, another constant complainer, and Comrade de Blasio, another complainer. Tonight we have a comprehensive timeline detailing how New York's government failed its citizens in a spectacular fashion. Sadly, by the way, New Yorkers pay more per capita than anywhere else in America. Let's go way back to November 2015. The report the president is referring to, the New York State Department of Health. Page 30 of that report. During a severe influenza pandemic, there's likely to be a projected shortfall of ventilators. 15,783, rounded off to 16,000, during peak week demand. After reading this report, Cuomo, the governor, purchased 0 new ventilators. 0, not one. Instead, instructed the commission to figure out ways to ration the existing 2,000 ventilators. That's dereliction of duty, especially when he wasted all of these millions, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on projects that all failed. But it gets worse. Flash forward to this year, January 24th, Cuomo was telling his state the coronavirus risk is to New Yorkers is low. February 6th, he said the flu is a much greater risk. March the 1st, he said there's no reason for undue anxiety. The general risk remains low. A few days later, well, he said New York can manage the increasing spread of the virus. That's in March. Just got out of March. He was wrong over and over again. And the worst part is his state was prepared for nothing. Now, number one target for terrorism, and if you have a pandemic of any kind, New York, highest concentration of people, 10 million people in the smallest geographical area. Now, New York's healthcare system is so overwhelmed, get this, cardiac arrest victims whose hearts cannot be restarted at the scene, they're not being taken to the hospital as is usual protocol. New York Post broke that story because of an executive order. What? We now know in New York, if you want to take the potentially life-saving treatment we have talked so much about, hydroxychloroquine, you have to go to a hospital in the state of New York to get it. That's a dumb idea. Governor Cuomo, this is the only state now doing this. Michigan rescinded it. Nevada rescinded it. Rescind the order, Governor.
As you no doubt saw today, and in fact may have personally experienced, another 6.6 million Americans filed unemployment claims last week. That's on top of more than 3 million new claims the week before. So far, over 10 million Americans have lost their jobs because of government-mandated shutdowns in response to the coronavirus. How many people is that? Well, it's more than live in New York City. There are 41 American states with total populations smaller than this group of newly jobless workers. Take a look at this graph of unemployment claims from the Department of Labor. Now, we don't use a lot of graphs on this show. This one will give you a sense of how unusual this event is. Don't read the numbers, just look at the line at the bottom. You'll see a fairly straight line with some bumps that ends with a sharply steep spike. That spike is right now. Now, the timeline you're looking at extends over 53 years. When the government began measuring unemployment claims, the Vietnam War was still a full year from its peak. We've weathered a lot of traumatic events since then. The 1973 oil shock, the 9/11 attacks, the collapse of our industrial economy, countless other frightening moments. None of this came remotely close to the economic effect the coronavirus shutdowns have had on America already. Now, the scale of this hasn't quite registered yet. Our leaders still seem far more afraid of a virus that probably kills fewer than 1% of those infected than the prospect of a third of all Americans losing their jobs. We don't judge anyone for that. There's something uniquely panic-inducing about infectious disease. The fear of it is atavistic. It's in our bones. We're born with it. But still, this is a moment. It will pass. A year from now, what will seem scarier? The Chinese coronavirus or the economic devastation it wrought? It's worth thinking about that as we move forward. But we can't. Thinking about things like that has been cast as a kind of moral crime by our opinion-making class. Last week, we did a segment with Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick. Patrick is 70 years old, and he has the kind of health profile that makes him especially vulnerable to this virus. Like most people in his position, he's worried about being infected. You would be too. He doesn't want to get sick or die, but he also has other worries. He doesn't want to see America destroyed. He wants his grandchildren to grow up in the same kind of country that he did, prosperous, stable, employed. He said all of that on our show last Monday. And almost immediately, the media outrage machine began belching smoke and making loud noises. Dan Patrick is telling old people to die for the stock market, they screamed. No, Dan Patrick was not doing that. Not even close. He didn't say anything like that on the air, and that's not what he meant. But it didn't matter. Patrick was vilified in dozens of news stories as if he was trying to kill the elderly in order to boost Exxon's share price.
How dare you?
In an environment like this one, where reactive, emotionally incontinent people have the loudest megaphones, it's nearly impossible to see clearly or make wise decisions. That's true of everyone, and particularly everyone in power, even our most impressive and thoughtful officials. At yesterday's coronavirus briefing, Dr. Anthony Fauci was asked when the restrictions on normal life will end in this country. Here's how he replied.
If we get to the part of the curve that Dr. Berg showed yesterday, when it goes down to essentially no new cases, no deaths at a period of time.
So it'll be fixed when we have no new cases and no deaths. How long will that be? Almost nobody thought to ask. We've got to beat this disease. Details are irrelevant. Cost is no object. That's the feeling in Washington right now, and certainly in the press corps that covers it. But details are always relevant, and there's always a limit to what we can pay. That's always true. Decisions we make today will echo for decades. They could radically change the future of this country. We need to try harder to keep perspective and to remain persistently open-minded in the face of this. What would have happened, for example, if we'd adopted a more conventional response to this epidemic? What if we asked the elderly and the immunocompromised and anyone else facing statistically higher rates of risk to stay inside, cloistered away? And then at the same time allow the rest of the population to use informed common sense and continue to work? What if we'd done that a month ago? Would the death rate today be much higher than it is now? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. But it's clearly a conversation we should have had before we locked the entire country down and put 10 million people out of work. But we didn't have that conversation. Instead, we outsourced the decision to public health officials. And that's a strange irony at the moment we're living through. One of the main lessons of this crisis is that the public health establishment failed us badly. The World Health Organization colluded with the Chinese government to lie about critically relevant facts during the early days of the outbreak. Once the coronavirus reached our shores, the CDC couldn't seem to produce working tests. Those were disasters. Many people died because the people we trusted to protect our health didn't do it. They've been thoroughly discredited. At the same time, though, we're being asked to trust these same people without hesitation, and for the most part, we are doing that. In other words, the experts failed, yet the experts now have more power than ever before. It's bewildering. In fact, it's reminiscent of 2008, when reckless behavior by the banks crippled the economy and crushed the middle class. But when it came time to fix it, we put bankers in charge of the cleanup. Now, this is not an argument against expertise. It's not even a populist argument. Of course, bankers understand finance. Epidemiologists understand coronavirus far more than most people do. So turning to experts in crisis makes sense, and we should, and hopefully we always will. But we can't allow experts to make the big decisions. That's not their job. This is a democracy. It is our job.
Come to Chinatown. Here we are. We're, again, careful, safe, and come join us.
If you're under 50 and you're healthy, which is most New Yorkers, there's very little threat here.
How dare you?
These people are sick.